stay on the wagon wheel
You're
ruts.
like, no, they're probably paleo Indian trails. That's what Route 2 is.
Well, we like to go around and search for arrowheads.
Right, place for your horses.
Uh,
So this is Senate Transportation. It's Friday, February 2nd, I think all day today. And we are gonna be talking this morning about some financial picture of the transportation funds, the money that we use to maintain all our transportation infrastructure. We have our, I don't know what we call them,
Fiscal
analysts.
Fiscal
Fiscal
analyst.
analysts.
Fiscal
We're going
analyst.
fiscal, yeah, okay.
The new Chris Route.
New Chris Root.
Yeah.
I will go by that. So take it away, Logan.
Sure. For the record, Logan Newberry, I'm a fiscal analyst at the Joint Fiscal Office. You have one document in front of you today. Last week, I came in and we were talking a little bit about the budget. You requested to see some of those out year projections, the 5-year projections that the agency puts together in the white book. So this is just taking that data that's in the white book, kind of putting it into one page for you to see. I have it just broken down by kind of how they break it down, total V-Trans programs, total town and highway programs, and then all total AOT programs at the very bottom there. This is a very simplistic sort of sum it up. You get your total T-fund, proposed T-fund and estimated T-fund appropriations, federal, other, this is your TIB, some of your transfers in between funds and stuff like that. And then the second to bottom line is the forecasted revenue as we know it from the January revenue forecast. And then I just simply subtracted the estimated T funds from the forecasted revenue to get sort of this shortfall, if you want to call it that. This is, again, very simplistic. There are a lot of moving parts that go into a budget every year. As you all know, this takes no account of transfers or carry forwards or anything like that affect these sort of numbers. This is just what is projected in the white book.
Okay, so the AOT programs line is the total of everything above that.
Correct, yep, it adds up everything. So
And then the yellow and the federal and the other are the revenues.
Yep. And the yellow, which is the T fund, is T fund dollars proposed to be appropriated in 26, 27, 28. Federal is federal dollars proposed or estimated, and then other is everything else.
T like the tip.
Like the TIB and some of the central garage transfers, stuff like
So
that.
that T fund forecasted revenue is the total of T fund, federal and other. No, it's not. It's less.
No, the T fund forecasted revenue is what was projected the T fund will make from the forecast that we just got in January. So that's essentially revenue in.
Okay, so 26, that's what we were talking about. We're really falling off the cliff, not only in this, but because we're propping up a lot of the 25 with the one-time 25, plus we've advanced the state match, or deferred the state match and drew down the federal dollars. So I don't know how much that is on the T-fund cash register out there as of liability. Remember last year, there were some projects we didn't do the state match because it could be paid later, but how much this would be reflected here is how much we've deferred to pay later.
That would not be, no.
And that wouldn't be in the white book either.
No. So this is just my understanding of like projected project costs and like DMV costs and stuff like that as the agency has projected them in the white book. It doesn't take into account, what appropriate or what reversions might be, what carry forwards might be, transfers. Like I don't have estimates for that going in the future. This is simply T fund appropriation estimates versus T fund revenue estimates.
Yes.
That might be for Senator Kitchell, but I just want to confirm my understanding of this. We raised the DMV fees to some notoriety last year, and that I understood not this year because it only went in halfway through, but it should generate, or it's going to be 20 million more. That's in this. So had we not done this, this would have been 20 million more of a deficit. I just want clarity on that. Okay.
And I think one thing to note about these total AOT programs, as we all know, these are fluid. They'll shift, and as projects are extended or dropped and stuff like that. So
But
these
that's
num-
happening every year,
Correct,
so that's kind of
correct.
historically.
so these numbers are not like solid or set in stone by
I mean, that's-
any manner.
But that's basically what would have to happen. Unless revenues go up, you'd have, let's say FY '26, you'd have to find 24 million of savings in the AOT programs.
Sure, or there's reversions or carry forwards or other
And,
sorts of transfers that add to that.
and if you don't have that 24.4, you don't have the match for a lot of that, highway projects.
Sure.
You gotta have the state T-fund money to draw down the federal. So the implications of having that much of a shortfall relative to what you have for, cause I don't know how, out of that total spending, how much it's really under the 90-10 versus 80-20. But it's a boatload of federal dollars that we can't draw down if we don't have the money.
Why in FY '20 does it drop back down?
I can't speak to that. Just what the numbers that were in the white book said. So you'd have to ask them their sort of logic.
It has to do with the projects and the cost
Correct.
over those
Right.
Correct.
that are
Right.
in the
Like
book.
When does
It's
the
hard.
federal money run out?
Oh, the IIJA?
Yeah.
The 25 million was for
2027.
over 2 years. It was for this, 25 and 26.
Right, and their hope is, or people think that it won't drop back down to the level before, that it will kind of set a new base, but we don't know that. Senator,
I don't know if you're gonna know the answer to this, but it's just a thought that I would love to maybe explore. But I'm curious, Misery Loves Company, are other states seeing this same declining transportation fund revenues because of gas? Are we out of step with our neighbors? And I know my son, if he lives, is probably gonna not wanna hear this. It tells me that we do need to look at our fee structure, especially with electric and hybrids not contributing to the gas funds even more than what we previously did. I think what we did last session was sensible and responsible, and I almost think we need to look at an ad valorem tax to also further fill in this hole that we're seeing.
I did find out something. New Hampshire has the ad valorem, but they do not have a purchase and use tax at the big purchase. So you'd have to go and calculate, are we getting it all up front when you purchase, as opposed to doing it over a 10-year period of time?
I think that you have to look at that exactly, because there's all kinds of different structures. You have to look at what the taxable debt load is to you per citizen to see, to be able to compare it that way. You can't just say, okay, well, they do this, because we might not be, you have to look at what their citizens are paying on their debt load,
So,
taxable debt load.
and you could say, well, we'll substitute because ad valorem might be better than the purchase and use at the time of purchase. But then that raises another complexity because a third of the funds under purchase and use, maybe you do the same calculation, I don't know what that would look like with the ad valorem tax.
And I think that I do think that there are ways we can raise revenue, without going into it. I mean, we're hearing right now that all the people driving EVs really do want to pay their fair share. But
It won't close your 24 million gap.
no, but it won't, but it might do $1 million, and
And
then.
it's really, at this point, people
How
are.
about registrations on motorhomes? I mean, not motorhomes, but
Yeah,
how about registrations there?
You can
Yeah.
look at it, I don't know what it would generate, because I don't know how many motorhomes we have registered to.
and not to hijack the planned presentation of what we have, but I think that we should, at some point in time before the end of this year, have a real discussion about whether we're going to go back to the power companies and see if we can get them to collect the tax for us, or we're gonna go with mileage based. I know the administration's going with mileage based, but they've only gone that direction because the power companies are dug their heels in, that they don't want to be involved with it, they don't have the technology. But we're hearing every time we talk to them that they actually do have the technology, or at least put it out there. If we're gonna wait another year, at least put it out there and say, okay, this is up to you. We're gonna task you with how you can set this up, but.
Administratively, the easiest thing is a surcharge on the license, on your registration.
I'm just thinking of that shock as far as going there to get your vehicle registered when we're already finding out, or inspected when we're already finding out that there's a lot of people out there that are delaying that because they just can't afford to do that, and then they're not driving.
How many people are doing EVs?
Yeah, true.
Is this the discussion or are we derailing this?
Well,
No, this is the discussion.
it's really precipitating, the huge, fiscal challenge we've got here with our transportation, system.
So as
So the
long-
graph is just real quick.
Just, yeah, if
It's
you
just the
want,
same
if
thing.
you want to see it, not.
the last comment I'd make, as long as this is on point, is that we need to balance this budget. And so there's two ways to do this. One, we can look at increased fees. We could also look at cutting spending. We could start getting our pencils out to look at what's in the transportation. But every dollar has a constituency, so that could also be stressed. But I personally see a problem here, this widening gap, and we need to either fill it with additional revenues or cuts.
Right, or raise the general fund,
I don't-
which is the share
All
appropriation.
right, let's do it.
And, but, you know, I don't know that if you ever get ahead of it, but I think at some point in time, we have to say that we spent a lot of money on infrastructure to get ahead of it. And, maybe at some point in time that, you know, we do have areas that we can look at and maybe not spend quite so much.
Oh, that's what we would have to do that, right?
It would have to do if you don't.
The programs, paving, whatever it is, would just decrease to meet the available funds, so.
But doing it in a responsible way.
Right, and that's what the AFD would have to do. And we would oversee that, yes.
Last thing I'd say to your comment about the electric companies, I'm not against furthering and looking at that technology, but when I've really wrestled with this, I don't see the technology currently available to easily track and measure when a car is being charged inside of our houses. I don't see that as something that's just ready to grab. That's gonna require more sophisticated vehicles, more sophisticated power line networking and so on. So I don't think that's easy fruit to grab.
Well, maybe.
Not for everybody. You can do it for
Right.
some.
Maybe you do a registration sort of as a bridge
So we'll have Michelle, I talked to Michelle
I like
about
until
that.
the technology gets.
Yes.
And my understanding is that they had a report, I think it's done, because I think she said end of January. She'll come in and talk about where they are with the miles traveled, why wouldn't we do, because I broached it with them again about just a flat fee, because we've talked about it here. And they're like, that's not gonna work, or something like that. So we can hear from AOT's position on those things. We also want to schedule the right-of-way fees. That's another revenue source that we're not really clear on why we're not collecting. And I think you guys should hear testimony on what it would be. It wasn't a small amount. It was much more than EV registrations. But
I want to offer clarity. So that was a different type of tax. That was a pole attachment tax, and what we're talking about is right of way. And I was confusing the two in my earlier discussion, but I still think it is germane as it is a shall language to feed the transportation fund to charge
because
people.
it can be used, it can't be used for paving, but it can be used for maintenance, as I understand. But Anthony can also tell us what are restrictions that you can use money.
I had a conversation with our CUD folks around some of this.
Yeah.
And, some of the least stuff disproportionately hits your most rural areas where you've got a lot of wire, you've got a lot of poles, you've got very few people. So the utilities that are serving those very small areas on the right of way would be much harder hit, relatively speaking, than say Burlington Electric, that is much more condensed and has a much more efficient in terms of population, as opposed to say a small utility that's having to run poles and wires up the back roads of some of the towns in the Northeast Kingdom, particularly Essex County. So you've got some regional impacts that would have to be carefully looked at relative to those utilities that serve those areas. And Washington Electric has got a lot of poles and wires down in Orange County, down in Topsom, and rural areas. And so there are some factors that really have to be looked at in terms of who would be hit when you're talking about utilities, and the small utilities that serve these rural areas would.
You have a lot of those small rural, two of them, you know, that I can not name, but talk about, that are just shaking their heads about how some of that money's being spent at that time, to your point, Senator Kitchell. And just shaking their head and saying, I don't really think that the intent to get that out to every last mile was exactly the way that it's going right now.
Well, if you did, I'm talking about the lease
Right.
and the right of way. you think about the poles and wires that have to be strung to serve a relatively small population in Essex County.
Yeah,
You got a lot more poles and wires than
No,
you've
you
got
do.
in the city of Burlington, for example.
we do.
So you can have very disproportionate, financial impacts,
Right.
is really what I'm, throwing out.
Okay. Do we have any more questions for Logan?
Well, you did exactly what, we thought would be helpful, and that is, it helps put figures around,
Yeah,
what that cliff
Yeah.
looks like.
certainly can help discussions about where we need to get to.
Okay. We'll be in touch if we have other requests, and we're gonna hear from Bradley Kuchenberger, I think basically on the same issue. I think he had talked about the department, the agency having a slightly different construct to how they look forward into the fiscal years. Bradley, are you ready?
Yeah, thank you, Logan.
Of course. I do have a question for you, Logan, about the tip that I'll ask later.
You know, I will remind us, we paid off all our TIB bonds, and we did it with the very thinking that we might need to do some bonding
Sure.
to draw down all the IIJA money. I know that gives administration apoplexy, but,
To bond again.
to bond again, but that was part of the reason that we we
Let me
cleaned
just
up
make
all
sure I
that
do.
debt to give us the capacity, to,
Yes.
get the match needed.
So to make a couple points on that, something, again, what Senator Chittenden even raised up, or how are our neighbors doing? And I'm not counting on who we don't have or who do have in Washington. My biggest fear is that we don't show a consistent plan about how we can draw down those funds. And we don't have a plan for that money's gonna go elsewhere. We don't have the strength in Washington that we used to have. And so I think that we have to be very strategic on how we do that. So
They'll either be clawed back to help finances on the federal level, or sometimes there's redistribution among states, which we've historically benefited from.
Exactly, and we don't wanna not benefit from that. We don't wanna lose that money that we have in sight by not having a good plan as to how we're gonna draw it down.
Refresh. I just posted it and, those dates will bring in copies shortly.
Oh, and I'm just wondering how that reconciles with your AOT preliminary IIJA spending that you gave us last year.
We shall find out. I think it reconciles pretty well.
Okay.
So, good
This
morning.
is last year, and I don't know if anybody wants a copy, but it shows, you know, the proposal to do the IIJ match over the multiple years and stuff. So it's kind of a refresher,
Yeah.
because memories get dim.
So I just wanted to make sure that this is what you were wanting to talk about. In the invite, it just said block grant. But I took some liberties, and I just wanted, before I jumped in, to make sure that was, you were looking to talk about the IIJA discretionary grants. Is that correct?
You should just talk about whatever we want.
I'm interested. in
Yeah,
hearing
we
about
want to hear this, but I think also we wanted this look going forward in the shortfall as we.
Sure, okay.
And what you have on
This
there
is
too.
all, yeah,
Connected.
this is all connected, so perfect. So for the record, I'm Bradley Kuchenberger, the Chief Financial Officer for the Agency of Transportation. Thanks for having me in here. So we have been working diligently to provide and apply for numerous competitive and discretionary grants that were made available through the Infrastructure Improvement and Jobs Act. So I just wanted to take a moment first to describe a bit of our methodology. So just a refresher, these are grant awards that are made available through the duration of the IIJA, which is federal fiscal year 26. That would really be state fiscal year 27. And states have that receive awards have 3 years to obligate funds. So some of the obligational or some of our budgetary constraints may spill out beyond state fiscal 27, which I've shown in a later slide. As we were preparing to apply for grants, we convened a committee. We meet pretty regularly, and we looked at projects available that have a high likelihood of being competitive for the grant awards and that already exist either in our capital program or our future project pipeline, because we had to look a little bit beyond what's specifically within our capital program. So here's an example of some of the grants that we've applied for, and not all have been successful, and they're just examples of some of the projects here. It's a bit of a shifting project list on the right-hand side, but in general, the totals hold regardless of which project is where.
These weren't funded, some of these were.
Some of these weren't funded, so let's just go right down the list. The Wildlife Crossings program was funded. That's a water-bearing culvert project. The Protect Resilient projects were funded. To the extent they will all be applied to those specific projects, I'm not perfectly clear, but that's an example of the type of project.
What kind of projects were they?
So Protect Resiliency project is anything that there's two programs for Protect. There's the competitive side, and then there's also a formula side, but they work hand in hand in that they are for basically enhancing a project's resiliency. So if I'm not an engineer.
Like flood resiliency?
Yeah, like climate, stormwater, floodwater resiliency.
This
So
is the competitive side here.
So this would be the competitive side, and these $9 million we were awarded those funds. So they would, just as an example, it'd be like if you had again, not an engineer, like a 16-inch culvert, but you could enhance the project to be a 24-inch culvert. This would pay for the difference of that gain in resiliency, right?
Or it could even be like maybe buying some river corridor property next to a road, just let it be a flood wetland or something.
I don't know, but yeah, things of that nature, right?
So what is the match with these grants?
So the match is typically 80-20 for these grants. There is
I was wondering
there is some variability, but it's generally 80-20. And I think the rural grant that we applied for, I'll just note that we applied, we didn't receive it. We will continue to try to apply.
what about the big one, bridge investment?
The bridge investment, that is still under both like application, and some of the portions of some of these grants haven't even been made available yet by the feds, but this is kind of the nexus of where we're looking to go, right?
Would the bridge investments be bridges that were already like in the book that you could just use more federal money?
That's what we tried to do, and we found particularly the Reedsboro Bridge, the Hartford Quechee Bridge. I'm not totally familiar with this Chester Bridge, but I think there's a mixture of bridge investment projects that are attractive enough to be competitive, large dollar enough to be impactful, and that was kind of the correlation we put together. So I think those are ongoing, and then there's a RAISE grant as well. You'll see some of the same projects come up. We mix them in multiple times to try to enhance our favorability. So as we look at our IIJA discretionary funding, this is a basic outlook, and I say it's basic because I've essentially divided in the future years the obligations or the match obligations for the grants program shown on the previous list. Spread out in kind of an even fashion, but as we all know, a capital construction project, that won't be exactly like that. But it is a good enough tool to look at where we short. So looking at through fiscal years, and these are state fiscal years now, we're looking at 24 and 25. We've been able to meet all of these obligations and have a total match requirement, even as our federal funding, is at a higher level. Looking into the future, I'm estimating, just based on the information that we have in our grants pipeline, I'm estimating a state match shortfall over the next few years of about $10 million per year. And I'd like to just put a caveat in there that my state match calculations all take into consideration the other growth from our AOT needs. So it includes some factors for salaries and benefits, for equipment costs, for all of that stuff.
That would be over and above what's in the white book?
Over and above, I'm sorry, I don't
The
understand.
project costs that are reflected in the white book?
It may be some of these projects and grants are assumed in the white book. So I think it'd be a mixture. I'd have to get back to you.
So
No,
it'll be added to it.
Well, I was just wondering, like Pay Act.
Things like that. Yeah, I consider all that in my,
That's what I thought you were talking about.
yeah, that was what I was talking about. So I would just like to say that if we got together as a budget committee in August or September, when we start preparing the next fiscal year's budget, and we're looking at a $10 million hole, given all of the variabilities and contingencies that are involved in our large agency, we would be not intimidated by such a gap. I just want to put that out there.
But
So it's showing the projected shortfall, but what I'm saying is that's not unusual given any budget year that we sit down and try to prepare a budget.
but it also means we're foregoing the additional resources that IIJA brings into the state, because you've got less match. So
Not necessarily.
well, aren't you it seems like it doesn't matter which federal pocket we're talking about, whether it's IIJA or just the regular formula money that historically we get. If we've got less T-fund money to draw down those more federal dollars, then we're not going to be able to draw down the more federal dollars. We're just kind of shifting from one to another. So if you have a $10 million, you're going to cover it, which you're saying you can. And the way you'd cover it obviously is projects, I would assume.
Not necessarily.
Well, where else?
It could be, we would review that. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I can tell you what our 26 budget would be, but we would take all of our agency priorities into consideration and do the most advantageous thing.
I guess what I'm getting back to is our original premise that the IIJ brought in resources in addition to what we normally would get.
Mhm.
And it seems like we're using, obviously with less state dollars available to
Right.
match those additional federal dollars, is counter to our goal of getting all of that money we can under the favorable circumstances that are here in this limited time period. That's what I'm getting at. Yes, you can accommodate it, and we can accommodate it and say, you eat it, and you will go in and you'll do adjustments, you'll move projects into the future. We know you can do that, but the fundamental question here is how much of those additional federal resources that we were under the impression that the IIJA would bring to the state are going to be foregone, because we're using it, because we can't leverage all the potential money that could be available to us.
But this is demonstrating, my chart isn't demonstrating a foregoing of any resources, it's
Well, if you
additive.
don't have the state match, how are you gonna draw it down?
What I'm saying is that we wouldn't necessarily cover the $12 million from state match in another way. I think what I'm asking for is, in this situation, the opportunity to review that in a future year when the time comes.
But you think you can make up that difference, the $12 million, 26, without eliminating projects? There's a possibility.
There's a possibility, yes.
And when you talked about using IIJ,
But I
partially,
they can make it work, I know that.
Well, I think you wanna, to your point, you got this money coming in and it's supposed to be transformational changes to our state. But what's it gonna cost us to, how are we gonna damage ourselves to collect that money?
Bradley, when you talked about using the IIJ for projects in the book, then we're not actually getting more federal money because the projects in the book get federal money.
That's right.
I mean, right? So it isn't like we need more match. For the projects that are in the book, we would have need match either way, whether it was IIJ. So the IIJ doesn't always require additional match than what we were projecting already, right?
So I don't think I'm following.
Since some of the IIJ money is being used to fund books that we already had in the book to fund with other just federal highway transportation money, there's not a different match. Or there's no difference. We have to match it whether it's the way it is today in the book or if we use the IIJ.
I think we need the delta between what we could leverage between all the additional IIJA, what we would get under our formula. I think that's really what you're
What's the
driving at.
formula, 80-20?
Yeah.
Like, that's also 80-20.
Right.
So by using some of the IIJ money for projects that we were gonna use just regular federal transportation money for, that's not getting us more federal money.
Under the way you described it now, yeah.
Is there another way? Is there a way to get more funded money and do it that way? I guess.
To do more formula projects in addition to these discretionary grants, which is, a possibility.
But you did that, maybe one way to lower the match requirement, but also discretionary is also meaning competitive, right? So you wanted to be competitive with the grants.
That's right.
So it wasn't always just to maximize the federal.
Yeah, it'd be more like an opportunity for other projects to become formula projects
See,
that
this
wouldn't
is-
otherwise be projects.
This is just a discretionary grant. And we're short 12 million for the discretionary side.
No.
Huh?
This includes the entire formula.
Well, you say
And
discretionary, I
so-
was just looking at the title and it was,
No, so this includes, I'm sorry.
But when it says IIJ, that's not just the IIJ grants?
IIJA is the entirety of the full program. So it's the full bill. It's the entire surface transportation
So
funding.
tradition, kind of like the normal federal funding is in the IIJ.
That's right. In
For that-
addition to
for those
that
2 years.
is discretionary grants. So if we go through the chart, I'm showing the IIJA core programs, which would be typically known as our formula
so
funding.
then your title is misleading because I'm back to the discretionary grant
Oh,
funding.
then I apologize for the
That's-
title.
Yeah, that's why I was thinking,
Yeah, so this takes into consideration the core programs. There is a general fund bridge program, so I'd like to just show that in the out years 27 and 28, I haven't assumed that these general fund bridge or general fund electric vehicle programs will continue. I think it's a good likelihood that our core programs would continue, and then we'd have obligations down below. This area shows the competitive grants. So this number 343, 562, 853, that would be our quote unquote formula program. And then in addition to that,
All federal transportation money.
all FHWA federal transportation money. Yeah, and then in addition to that, below, I'm showing some of our estimates related to our obligations in our discretionary grant awards. So you get to the bottom line, total federal funding, which is here. And it would be 387,104. And I'm showing it, yeah, I am showing a delta, but it is inclusive of all of our formula programs and the discretionary grant.
So what you're
opportunities.
saying is, if we had the 12.2, we could draw down every available federal dollar from the IIJA and formula.
Yeah, all things being equal from today, yeah.
All right. That's, which means without the match, you can't draw it down.
Unless we made different budgetary decisions in fiscal year 26.
Punching the can down the road.
Well, but then there are limitations on when that additional money is available, or, I mean, I thought it was 25, 26, and then.
Not necessarily, not
spend it.
if, not if we made budgetary decisions that had, you know, we could receive favorable revenue changes. You know, if we look,
Well, that could be
that's
done
one
beautiful,
possibility.
But I'm not.
Yeah.
I disagree.
We could make other decisions that impact programs that don't have direct match related projects. Because we took into consideration the agency priorities. So I'm just saying that there are more possibilities than what you suggested, Senator.
Well, I understand what they might be, I don't know, but.
And so the information that we just heard from our fiscal analyst about 24 million shortfall in fiscal year 26 and your 12 million. You know enough about what that.
I don't, I would have to review that in more detail.
I guess that took that, what Logan presented took in everything else and you're not.
That may be inclusive of some of these items as well. That's what I'd have to review is to see to what extent all of our variables are lining up.
Logan, if you just quick look on it, do you have any comment on like what the two differences between the two tables?
My numbers were T-fund dollars. I believe you're talking federal dollars, or are you talking T-fund dollars as well?
So it'd be federal dollars here, and then this would be T-fund plus TIB.
Yeah, and so mine was just, it included all T-fund dollars minus T-fund revenue. His is a little more specific. Mine did not get, it just took it straight from the white book as T-fund proposed to be appropriated and then just.
Did you
summed
have
it all
TIB
up.
as well?
TIB is not included in there,
In yours?
in mine.
Oh, that could make. a
TIB
difference.
is included in the others section, but I didn't compare it to TIB forecasted funds, just because it.
Right, but it's part of the math, like you, about what's available. The TIB money is in your chart.
It is in my chart, but it's not included in the T-funds section. That is just T-fund dollars.
But it's part of the equation to get to the deficit.
No.
So that reduces the deficit.
So so the TIB will play a part in the overall budget. I don't have the information to forecast it out to fiscal year 28. So I just put it in that little other section broken down, but it's not in the sort of comparison between revenue and T-fund dollars.
Okay, so that's why you have T-fund highlighted.
Correct.
Because that's the only.
That's that numbers are straight from the white book.
Well, then, the other, the 60, say in 25, 59.7, what is the other there?
So that's all other funds. So that's your internal service funds, that's your TIP funds, that's your what other ones? Local funds.
Yeah,
It's
those
not,
sets
it
of
was,
things, yeah.
the
Oh,
white
so
book
you
has,
are counting it then when you get to the 24?
no ma'am, no.
No?
So the 24 is only the yellow highlighted line, T-fund dollars only. Subtract, so take the forecasted revenue, T-fund dollar revenues, so that's just your gas tax, your diesel
All right,
tax, your
okay, so
DMV fees.
let's walk it through. In
Yep.
25, the T fund, you've got 326.2.
Correct.
Okay, that's without TIB.
Correct.
Okay, and then you're adding the federal.
Yep.
Other.
Yep.
And then you've got T fund forecasted revenue of 315. So you've got 326 as T fund, and then
Right.
forecasted revenue as 315.7.
Correct.
Um,
So the 10 million deficit is just the delta between those two numbers.
Just
Yeah.
T fund dollars, correct?
Yeah, okay, all right.
No other transfers or funds or TIP funds.
Okay.
So there will be some discrepancy between.
So what's your
Right.
TIP revenue? And that, they forecast that separately.
It's about 19 million.
88.2,
Yeah,
some, but yes, somewhere.
between there over the course of multiple years, yeah, approximately.
So that makes a big difference in terms of the overall revenue shortfall.
Right, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, I think this is a good, ballpark rule of thumb comparison between our charts, but I wouldn't wanna hang anything on it right now.
So what are you
without-
doing with TIB on yours? The match available, are you considering the TIB as the
Yeah,
match
so
available?
Yeah, for TIB, we pretty much only use that to match federal aid
Right,
projects
because of the parameters.
because of the
around
parameters around the fund. So in our state match available line, it's pretty much 100% of the TIB fund is included in that. And then the other remaining amounts are things like, what's left of the TF after we take into consideration all of our agency payroll, all of our other needs, all that stuff.
Okay. And then, so this deficit, you're not worried about it?
Not particularly. So when I looked back, so I did a little refresher before I put this table again together this year, and the
Yeah,
numbers were much larger. And as collectively, we were all able to take action to reduce that outlook. And like I said before, there's always a gap between the needs of our state fund, T fund and TIB dollars, and what we can do, a gap between the wants and what we have available at the beginning of any budget build. And if you were to tell me today that I would be sitting here in August and have a $12 million gap to fill between August and the governor's recommended budget, I would be thrilled. That's how I feel
That's
about it,
doable.
because that's doable.
it is doable, but we're still foregoing some of,
You'd have to forego something. It wouldn't necessarily be federal dollars, but you'd have to either forego something or have, a project outside of our capital program complete and now not need all that stuff would have to come into play.
right,
And there's, a lot of that. We have a large agency, so that's why I say, I would be happier if it was a positive number, but
it would be a lot
I-
bigger if we didn't have the.
yeah, it would. And when I sat here and had this conversation last year, it was, and luckily we were able to take action to accommodate that, and everyone had proposals to do that. But I'm not intimidated by the prospect of that amount, considering what we go through every year.
Okay, so should,
Senator Kitchell, you are young and beautiful and very well experienced. So are you?
Your eyes are brown.
Are you intimidated with your years and decades of experience?
I know that you can close the gap,
Mhm.
but I'm just thinking in the end, if you've got less money, and where general fund is, transportation funds are used, operations and, maintenance and so forth, that's really where the T fund slug is, because it's not subject to the match. So it just means that there is the potential that there could be more federal dollars available, that even after you make all these adjustments, still would not be able to be, you wouldn't have the match to do that particular project. at that time.
Yeah.
And that's the choice, or you can help close like the 12.2 and say, well, maybe in 25, you made it work because you advanced the 12 million from the general fund set aside. So
Yeah, I mean,
Which
we
was
used
there
it
for-
all,
yeah,
yeah,
used all in 25, and our intent, and originally last year it was gonna be over the 2 years, 25, 26. So anything that we can do to close that, even by a few $1 million, obviously at 80-10 or 90-10 if it's interstate.
some are, yeah.
Yeah, leverages and allows us to do more improvement on the infrastructure. It's just, it's just a matter of how much you want to close the gap and minimize the potential that we have to do that. Because there are limitations on how much T-fund you can move
And
around.
it puts more pressure on the things that we use the T-fund for, like the public transportation or the other initiatives in the last few years that we've been funding. You know, electric bike incentives or whatever, those kind of things.
Well, that's that cutting piece we could.
Yeah, it would be very hard to do those in the future.
Really quick, is this unprecedented? I mean, is this alarming to you, or is this par for the course that we might sometimes have a gap like this that we but just resolve to address in the next budgetary cycle when we have more information in the future?
Well, I think it's just showing the fact that our old traditional tax base is under pressure. And it has been for quite a long time. There's no question about that. I mean, with the efficiencies, we've talked about it,
Yeah.
fuel efficiency, so the gas tax revenues. And then, so this is a national issue. The federal
Yeah,
government
it's
has
a
dealt with
national
it
issue.
they didn't raise the gas tax, but what they've done is use borrowed money to prop up the payments to the state. That's how
Yeah.
they've done it.
Yeah, I think Senator Chidney, you asked Logan earlier, if other states are experiencing this,
They
and
are,
across the board, yeah, like every state is experiencing
for
it.
all the same factors.
Except maybe the super large states, but, or states with humongous toll revenues, but yeah, all the, don't get any ideas. Don't get any ideas.
That's good. He's called Tommy Toll, Tommy Tax, I'm gonna call him Tommy Toll.
That is why the state match available goes down. That's just considers the T-fund revenue.
Yes, that's what he's factoring in.
Yeah,
There's not another reason.
right.
That would be the only reason.
New Hampshire has quite a bit of tolls, but they have quite a bit of population, and it's all centered where the tolls are.
Right.
Yeah, so like,
For the record, I don't necessarily like tolls, I like use-based assessment. So if we can use technology to track usage, there should be variable rates of assessment or car registration fees based on who's using the car ways more and in more congested urban areas. So call me Tommy Tolls if you want.
Well, those have been common
Oh, we
ways
just
of
love-
dealing with. Of course, the other thing that some cities have done is move to pedestrian-only areas to encourage using public transit. I'm reading a great biography of Robert Moses and how he's it's only 1,000-something pages, and exactly what he did, and it was what the car and traffic impact on that whole New York City. It's very interesting.
Okay.
Because you can build more cars per year than you can build miles of road.
Can I
Yeah,
just
you have
ask?
other stuff?
No, I don't have any more to provide. I just wanted to ask before we finish today if there was any other information in this realm that would be useful that we can, as the agency, put our heads together and come up with any different looks or whatnot. Just please let us know. You know, it's something we're interested in talking about and making sure that we're all clear on what's available, what the impacts are, what we think is in the state's best interest all together. So,
Okay.
You know, I hope in some of that discussion, and I'm really not a great person to say take on debt, but if you had a major interstate bridge that you could leverage 90% money for now, and you have to borrow the match, longer term, that's still gonna benefit the state. And so I realize that, there's a certain, if we don't have the money right now, then we forego it, but there may be very significant investments, long-term investments, that it would make sense to take advantage of this funding. And that was the whole concept behind the setting up the TIB. So I guess I would just say that you're gonna be controlling the projects, you know what they are. But are we in fact making decisions to short-term to deal with this fiscal reality that actually is disadvantageous to the state infrastructure long-term? And there, oftentimes we do that in terms of short-term expediency and, and philosophical limitations. I'm not gonna do any kind of bonding or whatever, borrowing in my watch. And so that's my only concern, is that we get locked into something that in fact longer term could be short-term expediency could be short-sighted long-term, I guess is
Money
my.
wise, pound foolish.
Yeah.
So to-
Just really importantly and quickly, philosophically, I completely agree. I support bonding for long-term capital infrastructure projects, because then you're aligning those that are using the resource over the 30-year life with paying for it. Whereas if you pay for it all this year, you're getting today's taxpayers to fund the infrastructure that's gonna benefit people that might move out of the state and that are gonna benefit from it. So I'm not against bonding for infrastructure.
Same, I think that at times, we were fortunate to have the amount of monies that we had, but you have to use all your tools in the tool belt when things get tough. And you have to remember that cycles are cycles, and, sometimes you have to do exactly what you said, Senator Kitchen. You don't just dig your heels in and say, we're not gonna do that. We have to cover, we have to run the state, we have to be responsible, we have to stay proactive, and everything that we have at our disposal at times, we have to look at it.
Okay, on that note, you brought up cycling, we're gonna switch
Oh,
Nice segue, thank you again.
topics.
We're on break, aren't we?
Well, we were supposed to be on break, but I'm proposing we hear from transportation monitors, then go on break.
Thank you, Bradley.
Get the DMV bill out today and then pull it back to committee.
I think that's what the discussion will be, yeah. We could have a quick discussion.
We can do what they did, right?
We can do that, yeah. Come on in, just push.
Hello.
There's a chair,
Seats back there. There's one back here. We got a couple spots there.
Bradley's giving up his.
Hi.
Bradley's drinking like a tree and leaving.
See ya.
So Dan isn't. Are you?
I don't.
I know it's Dan.
Where did Dan go?
Dan.
He just ran away?
Yeah, he just ran away as soon as you guys got in.
I can send it to you.
Okay,
Are you gonna lead off, Katie? I
Yeah.
think so, because you're sitting there.
yes, good assumption.
You're gonna,
I'll share some slides as soon as
I need your email.
my email address, yes. K Gallagher, GALLAGHER @pnrc.org.
and when you start, you'll explain who you all are, what you're doing today.
Okay, just-
To the committee, there was an if you have time, or if you've already seen it, there was an email from yesterday.
Yes.
That's helpful about the email. I thought, like you do a great job of explaining kind of where we all are.
While we're waiting, I have a copy of our policy priorities, which I think were already sent to you, but if you would like a paper copy, as well as a paper copy of our for the slides that I'm about to show. So I'll pass these around.
Oh, thank you. Looks like a school teacher.
Clicked on the Zoom link.
Sorry.
This document is background on one of the policies we'll.
Take the extras.
Should we get the check?
Yep, thank you.
I lose paper. You submitted these to Megan to have it on our committee page?
It's posted.
Okay.
Well, as long as it was sent on Dan's email.
I believe we did.
We have two things under Dan's name.
Yeah, I think we don't have the latest one, I just.
We have the policy priorities.
You wrote
this
that.
document. Yeah, and the slide document. Stop us a yield if you don't have it.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you. So my name is Katie Gallagher. I direct the Sustainable Communities Program with the Vermont Natural Resources Council, which is a statewide environmental organization. But as part of that work, I help to but coordinate the Transportation for Vermonters Coalition, which is what we are here to discuss today. So thank you so much for giving us this time. I'm just going to start with a quick overview of the coalition. I know that we've been in this committee before. I don't think you were here last year, but I'll just do a brief overview of the coalition, and then I will hand it over to my colleagues. So I think we have some time for questions at the end, but I know we're running a little late, so feel free to ask questions as we move forward. So I just kind of laid out the agenda. So who we are a pretty broad coalition. We work cross-sector and primarily focus on advocacy in the transportation sphere. And really our goal is to try to work with you all to create a sustainable and accessible transportation for our rural state, which we understand is no small feat. We have 15 member organizations, which you can see here, and several of which are with me today. But we also have many more affiliates who work with us on advising on policy and bringing to us the concerns of their members and folks who are more on the ground in terms of transit services and provisions that help to inform our work. So I think the diversity of this group starts to give you an idea of how we think about transportation. Don't need to tell you all, but transportation impacts pretty much every area of our lives. We formed several years ago because even though we're doing a lot as a state, thanks to the work of this committee and the House and others, we are still falling short in making sure that every Vermonter has access to transportation options that help to get them from point A to point B. We also know that there's all of these other places that transportation has a really significant impact. So from an environmental perspective, we know that transportation is the largest source of our greenhouse gas emissions.
It was.
Yes, although I think when we have
emissions just surpassed.
right, when we have
According to the report, which I read.
yeah. I would anticipate that goes back up again, unfortunately, if people are driving more outside of COVID changes. But Kelly from AARP Vermont, I believe, has spoken to this committee in the past, and unfortunately she wasn't able to be here this morning, but she also is able to speak to just the amount of our population that is aging and aging in a place that does not support their ability to get from one place to another. So we are working to try to make sure that we can shift our transportation system from one that is primarily focused on moving cars around to one that not only is able to accessibly and affordably move people around on streets where they might not be in a vehicle, but also do it in a way that supports our environmental goals and our economic development goals and public health and safety. So before I pass it off to my colleagues, I just want to touch on two kind of overarching points that the coalition felt was important this year. The first is that, as we all know, Act 250 is a big conversation this year. So in light of these conversations, we just wanted to put out a statement recognizing that first of all, transportation policy is land use policy. And so when we're having these conversations about land use policy, it's critical that transportation is coming into that, and that we are encouraging the ongoing coordination of our community development and the land use laws that guide that with transportation, and in particular thinking about the fact that we really need denser communities in order to support the types of transportation solutions that we are looking for, in addition to the fact that having compact community development helps to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So this is our statement of principles on Act 250, as you can read here, but just wanted to raise the importance of that conversation.
Are you doing testimony in the other policy committees regarding any Act 250 changes?
So we have not been invited to any other committees yet, but it is something that we will be sharing with folks.
Because we're not the committee that.
Yes, yeah.
Obviously.
The second point is about funding, which you all know is kind of the elephant in the room in terms of transportation. We understand that there is an ongoing need for funding, but in particular, as we think about changing funding sources for transportation, and the fact that climate change is increasing the costs of maintaining our existing transportation infrastructure, not to mention all of the new programs that we're looking for in expanding transit, and all of these things, take money. And so we wanted to raise the point that we believe that we need a new policy or regulatory tools to have a longer term sustainable funding source. The Climate Council has recommended looking at a cap and invest or a performance standard or some variation of one of those tools as a mechanism. The carbon reduction strategy that VTrans undertook over this past year also acknowledged the need for these types of bigger funding mechanisms. So we wanted to raise this. Again, this is a larger conversation, and our understanding is that as part of the recommendation from the Vermont Climate Council that this work ideally will be moving forward. I also just wanted to kind of throw in this chart at the bottom here, which is from a smart growth report card that AARP and VNRC put forward several years ago. So this data is a bit old now, but I think the trend still holds that we are generally talking about walking, biking, safe streets, public transit, and those numbers compared to the overall transportation budget are still relatively small. So while we might be talking about some numbers that feel significant to us all, it's still a relatively minor part of our overall budget.
And just so you know, this slide is different than the slide that's presented on our website. And it's the same as the one you handed out, but the one that Dan sent.
I'll update it.
It's older.
Okay, thank you.
My only response is we've had a lot of conversation about how we finance our transportation infrastructure, which you have to have, whether you're riding on the bus or whatever. And it's been a user fee. And all of this is designed to reduce really carbon emissions and promote societal good, which is not deniable. The question though is how we finance it, because concurrent with this initiative is an erosion of the very tax revenues that are necessary to support the infrastructure and all the other investments in public transit. So that's a real challenge in terms of how we reconfigure the revenue base from that reliance on the automobile and the gas tax and purchase and use of vehicles, et cetera. So we have a real challenge here in terms of what historically has provided the revenues to support some of these policies that is eroding, and it's something that we're struggling with here. And so, there's no maybe easy answer other than we've got to look at some reconfiguring of our ways that we finance our transportation system in the way that we want it to be in the future.
Yeah.
Because there's less money to support all the things that people say they would like.
Right. Agreed. Yeah. Rob?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Rob Kidd with the Vermont Sierra Club, also part of this coalition. I don't know if you all are aware, in the House, there's a proposal for having the treasurer do a full comprehensive study along with the Agency of Transportation, the Agency of Natural Resources, kind of like what you have with the Clean Water Bill. Because yeah, we have these bigger systemic problems about how we're paying this long term, not just from the gas tax, not just a user fee, because this is a complicated, you guys have looked at it, but we need to come together as a group. So look, I think that's gonna make it through the House, but you can get more information on that in the coming weeks.
Okay.
So I am going to leave it there and hand it off to my colleague, Annie at CarShare Vermont. Before I do, just want to say thank you again for taking the time to hear from us. We understand that this is a really huge task. We are excited by two of the bills, one of which is in, that Rob just mentioned, H693 and H685, which we'll talk a bit more in more detail in a minute. But thank you again for having us.
Hey folks. I'm Annie Warden, Executive Director of CarShare Vermont. Nice to see you. So I'm going to talk about a path forward to expand car sharing to more Vermonters as it's described in H693. And just to set a big picture, we know that many Vermonters are left behind by our transportation system, that there are many gaps in mobility despite significant investments in public transportation and bike ped infrastructure and roads and bridges and all of the things we're trying to do to get people around. There's still so many Vermonters, especially vulnerable Vermonters, who are still not able to access food, access medical care, all of the things that they should be accessing. And more states, especially more rural states, are investing in shared mobility systems that can be a little more flexible, convenient, and scaled to give people access to reliable transportation, primarily in the form of cars, but shared mobility can include, bikes. I'm sure you've heard of scooters, many modes. So for years, CarShare Vermont celebrating 15 years this year, which is hard to believe. We only exist right now in Burlington and Winooski, but since our inception, we've been requested by some of you, your colleagues, Vermonters across the state. How do we get car sharing to our communities? We need this service. And what we've proposed is to take a step forward towards that and just coming up with a plan that would analyze what it would take to publicly subsidize a car sharing network in more Vermont towns. Not every Vermont town, to be clear. There are some towns that are so rural, if you have to walk, 2 miles to get to a town center, car sharing is not going to be work. But there are plenty of towns where there is a village center where people, maybe there are 1-car households and somebody could get a ride, or there is public transit where folks could access shared vehicles. So what we're asking for is the development of a plan that would talk to various service providers, that would think through various operational models. One example, currently CarShare Vermont is working with a municipality that actually approached us. They want to purchase an electric vehicle, use state funds to install the charger. Their staff will use the vehicle during weekdays, but then it'll be turned over to the community when they're not using it. And it's a way that they're helping to subsidize car sharing for their town. And, there are many other iterations of that. And when you think about where car sharing exists in places like Minnesota, California, Michigan, Washington, and Oregon, all now have different kind of takes on a rural model. Sometimes it's a car that's used in a car sharing capacity. When it's not used in that capacity, it may be turned over to volunteer drivers who are assisting folks who may not be able to drive themselves to meet their needs. So that's what we're asking for. We are, a question is often, well, doesn't the MTI grant program do this? And I just want to get ahead of that and say, no, it doesn't, because the MTI grants are variable. They're one time, they're competitive, it's inconsistent. It's not a guarantee that a community would get a grant. They are very limited in funding. You know, last year's cap was at 50,000, and they're restricted from being spent on capital and operations. So that's not going to fund the delivery of a service. And I just wanted to talk about the benefits of shared mobility. We know from our experience, CarShare Vermont's the local example. We're the only operator now that exists in Vermont, but we know that our service significantly reduces vehicle dependence. 90% of our, thousands of members who have passed through our system in the past 15 years, 90% belong to 0 or 1 car households because they're able to reduce the number of vehicles they own. All of our members reduce their driving. Our membership reduces the amount of miles they drive by like 35% every year, taking into account that a significant portion of our membership is actually increasing their VMT by gaining access to a car. So we provide free memberships to anyone who needs financial assistance. And it's proven to be a great way to allow people to access transportation more conveniently, reliably, and also have greater independence. And that's really important. So we'd like to have a plan. It's not committing that a program will come into play, but it looks at a model that isn't just leaning on us to try and figure out how to expand with our limited
And that's what the
resources.
House bill.
That's what the House bill is, H693.
693. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll turn it over to Jonathan.
All right, thank you all for having us. Again, my name is Jonathan Weber. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Complete Streets at Local Motion. Our mission is to make it safe, fun, and accessible for everyone to bike, walk, and roll in Vermont. And we fit together with what Annie's organization does and what transit does. When people are using CarShare, they're also walking and biking a lot. When they're using transit, they're often walking or biking to their bus stop. And so all this fits together to sort of set us up for a sustainable, equitable, affordable transportation system. And there are really 2 big opportunities that we see right now, sort of on the House side, that we want to talk about and hopefully answer any questions and hopefully get you all to support. So the first is a bill that modernizes our vulnerable user traffic regulations. And the second is a variety of things that increase active transportation funding and also help to reduce the cost of projects. So first up is the vulnerable user traffic regulations. There are basically 4 things in this. The first fixes a minor fix to our definition of pedestrian to basically close a gap in it that does not cover people in manual wheelchairs. So right now, if you're in an electric wheelchair, if you're on foot, you're covered by the definition, but if you're in a manual wheelchair, you are not. So just a minor fix there, but an important one. The second, we have right now in legislation a requirement that if you're on a street and there is a sidewalk along the street, you have to be on that sidewalk. You can't walk in the street. In Vermont, our sidewalks are often covered in snow, frozen over, panels are often lifted and cracked. And so this presents some real issues, especially for people who use walkers, who use wheelchairs, for whom that unevenness or that snow is like, it's impassable. And so we often see these folks walking in the street, and we don't think that should be illegal. So this would address that issue by eliminating the requirement. Right now we have a statute that recommends that drivers increase clearance when they're passing a vulnerable user to 4 feet. We think that should be a requirement. You should have to provide a safe passing distance when you're passing a person walking, a person in a wheelchair, a person on a bike, also an equestrian. And then finally, there are 2 policies that make bicycling safer at intersections. So the first allows people on bikes to cross intersections on pedestrian signals. So if I'm on a bike and I'm coming up to a red light and the pedestrian signal comes on in my direction of travel, I'm allowed to cross through the intersection using that signal. cars aren't moving, it's a protected movement, and it allows the person on the bike to get out in front of traffic, be more visible. So it's a really significant safety benefit. It also eliminates that chance for a right hook crash, where the person on the bike is coming up next to the car and they turn right through the person's travel. So that's a good safety benefit. And the second, which I handed out and is sort of discussed in the fact sheet from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, is the Idaho stop, or stop as yield. And so this allows people on bikes, when they are approaching a stop sign, to treat it as a yield if there is no other traffic present at the intersection. So the way this works and the way it's worded in legislation is, if I'm coming up to a stop sign on a bike, I have to slow and prepare to stop, evaluate the situation at the intersection. If there are cars, if there are people walking, I have to stop and treat it as usual. If there is no other traffic present, you can cautiously roll through the stop sign. This just allows a person on a bike to maintain their momentum, which is obviously really helpful. And it also means that because you have that momentum, if you do need to get out of the way of a car that's maybe running the stop sign, you have some momentum to do that. So all of the states that have implemented this have seen improvement in safety, and that's, again, discussed in that fact sheet from the Highway Safety Administration. 693 makes some good, has some good language around complete streets and the Vermont state standards. So it ensures that the state standards update will incorporate complete streets. It also talks about targeting funding for complete streets within our designated centers. This is really beneficial. Of course, those places that have denser land use, more origins close to destinations, are places where walking and biking is most feasible as a mode of transportation. And so it makes sense to target our funding there, at least to some extent. And then finally, a real challenge for village centers, in particular rural village centers, is making state highways that run through them safe for walking and biking. And so this asks the agency to develop some standard treatment guidance to accomplish that.
Sometimes that's geographically not possible. I have up around Joe's Pond, Route 2, and there's a bank and there's road and there are camps. And, you know, people have said, wouldn't it be great if we could have a bike path when they do that? And people are saying, yes, it would, but just the constraints of certain areas make it not possible.
Floating bike path.
Well, I suppose we could floating, right?
Yeah, I like
We could
that idea.
paddle instead of.
Yeah.
So I know there are times when you'd say, boy, that would really make a lot of sense, but
Yeah.
just the topography and location and you can't move the pond and you can't move the hillside. So there are times when, even with the best of intentions, and you would like it done in residence, but it just can't be engineered.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And this would not be something that says that the X has to be done everywhere. This is something that says here are options that can be accomplished on a state highway. And then of course it would, you know, you'd have to look at if that option is actually feasible in the location that you're looking at. But yes, absolutely, point taken. It has to be context sensitive, which we talk about a lot too. And then, you know, developing the guidance is one thing. We also have to have funding to accomplish the projects. This chart looks at the funding for the bike and pedestrian grant program specifically, which is one of the primary funding sources for municipal bike and ped projects. We're talking about sidewalks, crosswalks, bike lanes. So the dark blue bars basically show what towns asked for in funding for a given year, and the light blue bar shows what was awarded, basically what AOT had to give. The green bars are the same numbers for the small scale grants. So, you know, what this shows is a really pretty significant gap in what municipalities want to accomplish and what the state has been providing. So we would really like to see that amount increase so that municipalities can get more of these projects done that they want to.
That we're dealing with a $12 million deficit and desire for more funding.
Yeah, and we had some discussion earlier, you know, with Katie and Rob about that point exactly. I think that that's an important conversation to have, you know, long term. I also think that VTrans's roadway budget is enormous, and I think that there is room to move that to other priorities. A single interchange project can cost $20 million. And I think that there's room to rejigger how we spend that money. The other change that it makes is it recommends giving bike and pedestrian projects priority for transportational alternative program grants. So that's another way to make sure that municipalities can get some more of these projects done.
What would that push out?
Sorry?
What projects do you think are ahead of the alternative?
Sure. So right now, both bike and pedestrian projects and environmental mitigation projects are eligible for transportation alternative program funds.
So you'd put those ahead of the environmental mitigation? Is that what you're saying for priority?
Yeah, right now, it funds a lot of salt sheds. And we think that we'd like to see bike and pedestrian infrastructure getting more money through that program. Finally, I mentioned lowering costs for these projects. So H685 asks VTrans and the State Historic Preservation Office to evaluate historic resource review requirements. These can often take up to 30% of the overall cost of the project. They also add months or sometimes up to a year of delay. This is being required even for projects that don't go outside the existing right-of-way. Here in Montpelier, they're looking at adding a bike path on Berry Street, and essentially they're replacing a lane of parking to build a bike path. The project does not go outside the edges of where the sidewalk is right now, and they're having to do NEPA review as well as this full historic resource review that catalogs all of the properties along the street, 60 pages of basically photos of houses and buildings. And every planner that I've talked to says that they have never once found that one of these reviews discovered a significant impact.
So a lot of resources to change nothing.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So we think that would be really beneficial. And I think now I'm turning it over to Christina. Thank you all.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christina Erickson. I'm the Executive Director of Local Motion. It's nice to be back with you. And hello, Senator Mazza. Good morning. Local Motion, as part of our alliance with Transportation for Vermonters, would like to see an increased investment in the successful Mobility and Transportation Innovations Program. And we suggest that the program be slightly restructured to provide multi-year grants with reliable timelines and funding expectations and sufficient appropriations to support large-scale projects and implementation of services. So Annie related earlier how the MTI program as it's currently structured has some significant drawbacks. In 2023, there were requests that totaled over 850,000, but only 673 plus were funded. And just a few examples of these funded projects, several of them were microtransit operations in several towns throughout Vermont, developing outreach materials for the Community Rides Vermont program, and revitalizing a bike share program in Putney. So some small things, but some significant things as well. There was also a development of a statewide public message campaign for improving mobility and access for transit-dependent Vermonters. And just love to imagine, more programs like this that are across the state with the more funding that could shift to make them available. We're very pleased to see that VTrans is recommending the $3 million to support this from the carbon reduction program funding. And we think that's an excellent use of these types of funds to further more of these excellent programs.
Some of the were they pilots?
Yeah.
They were,
Some were studies.
Okay. So the advantage of a pilot is to see,
see if it works.
But I assume Montpelier is still considered a pilot, or they? I don't know if they're still getting it.
I know Morrisville was the newest one, I think.
Are those for the microtransit projects?
Uh-huh.
I'm not certain of the status of those, but we can look into that.
Like MTI grants, if they're getting, because they took away their bus service, so they were getting money for their fixed route, and they're using that for
Our coalition also supports the expansion of the popular e-bike incentive program, and actually would love to see an increase up to $500,000 for this current year budget to ensure program consistency, reliability, and access to this clean, affordable transportation option. E-bikes are rapidly growing. And I know I came here and talked about e-bikes last year, but rapidly growing in popularity and more Vermonters.
Register them.
We don't get mad.
That's a conversation for another day. Okay. But people of all walks of life are finding this mobility tool as a way to get to places further away, or for those that live with hills, uphill, easier than a conventional bicycle may allow. And in fact, just in the cafeteria this morning, I spoke with someone who said, yeah, I used that rebate program. I wouldn't have been able to get an e-bike without it. And she uses it to get to work every day. In this current cycle of funding, 36% of the e-bikes purchased have been cargo or adaptive bikes, allowing families and those with mobility challenges the opportunity to transport themselves by bicycle. And in the last year that I've been in my role, I've spoken with several bike retailers here in Vermont who are eager to see the rebate program continue and expand, as it allows them greater confidence in having these bikes in their inventory. If they sit there and no one can buy them, they're not going to buy more to have on the floor to sell. So we think this has been a fantastic program and has a lot of opportunity to expand. And I believe that is our final slide for today. So if there are further questions, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but we encourage and welcome your questions, and we'll look forward to continued conversations about many of these programs.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for your work and coming into State House today. And we look forward to some of this stuff coming over from the House so we can discuss it, and we know how to get a hold of you if we have questions.
Excellent.
As we move forward.
All right.
Unless there's no questions. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
And then I sent Katie up to the house because we're scheduled to testify there right now.
Okay.
But she bailed out.
So we're running.
So-
And we never saw it down.
Oh, this is Katie's computer.
Yeah,
I'll
pretty
take that
Yeah,
then.
yeah. So we
That would
can
be
go on
terrible.
break, Megan.